powered with every possible engine that we know of, and some other impossible engines that the Germans built, especially for the UFOs. So my point is that such crashes are organized, engineered, so that to explain away this sudden explosion and cornucopia of new technologies to the rest of the engineering elite, without having to reveal to everybody that, oh yes, yeah, we are in contact with aliens.
Well, it's a very interesting point, because the cover-up that has persisted throughout history, and I'm not talking about modern history in the last 50 or 100 years, but throughout history, all of the researchers have shown, whether you quote G. Cope Shellhorn, who is a PhD and a biblical scholar, and has shown that UFOs have existed throughout the ages, going back at least 5,000, maybe 10,000 years, and there's ample evidence of it. There has always been somebody here that's been contacted, and it usually is going to prove to be that it was the kings, the priests, or those of the highest echelons of government. And they didn't want the general public to know that they were trafficking with aliens, if you will, and for whatever purpose or reason. Now, in the current era, let us say the last 100 years, you have the same problem. There were aliens around this planet. And in the period of more modern history, which I would say, let us say from the time of the fall of Atlantis, or the destruction of Atlantis, which many people may still dispute, and a lot of scientists want to dispute, but there's more than ample evidence if you know where to dig. Atlantis was apparently destroyed by outside intervention, which produced the cataclysmic earthquakes which finally sank the last island. But in the process after that, a governing body on Earth was set up, which is now known as, and has been known for centuries and millennia, as the Order of the Illuminati. The Illuminati is a strange organization. It has its current world headquarters, and has had it for at least 500 years, at Basel, Switzerland. But from the earlier days, it was elsewhere, to the days after the collapse of Atlantis. And there's a governing body within it of 3 people. 2 were always humans, and the 3rd was always a reptilian, which is to say there is an outside influence in the affairs of Earth, and has been for at least 10,000 years, a direct influence. And the rest of the orders, apparently, for the progress of humanity, or what is to go on here, would appear from outside. Today, the Order of the Illuminati is not the only secret organization. There are many. We have the not-so-secret, but of course that has the secret aspects to it, the CFR, Council on Foreign Relations. We have the Trilateral Commission. We have the Club of Rome, which is not well known, but the think tank for the whole operation of the secret societies and groups.
And the limitation of the population and all these populations.
They have generated the programs, and you have the Bilderbergers, and interlocked with all of this, of course, is the Order of the Illuminati. They have been setting policy, along with the so-called elite, the wealthiest people on Earth, for more than a year or two, and more than 100 years or two. It's been going on for centuries, because the old money of Europe, as they call it, is not 400 or 500 years old. It's perhaps 1,000 years old. You have to consider the de Medicis of Italy, and some of the other families which are unknown totally to the outside world today, which have trillions of dollars in wealth. As only one example, the Habsburgs of Germany and of Europe have enormous wealth. It's uncounted. It's in the trillions. They have gold reserves of staggering quantities. It would make Fort Knox look like a toy playpen. That Fort Knox doesn't have any gold now anymore, but in any case, when it did have a gold reserve stock, what the Habsburgs already had for centuries in Europe was far greater than anything we've had in this country. I won't go into all the financial details and how I know some of this, but enormous quantities of money, of gold, of wealth have existed, and it's all been maneuvered. It's all been controlled for a purpose. The real break in civilization, you might say, became obvious in the Industrial Revolution, and when the church's power was broken in 1500 AD, when you had the Protestants, as they called them, Luther, John Calvin, and all the rest who followed, and the power of the Vatican was largely broken, not totally, but largely broken, and with it came the Renaissance and, of course, the development in an open style of the technology which was already known and held in secret. And this has been known for many, many centuries. You have knowledge of alchemy, which is a very advanced form of chemistry, and actually a very advanced form of matter manipulation, which was known to the ancients.
Vibrational chemistry.
You go back to Atlantis and elsewhere, you probably will find an older form of alchemy, which was very active in those days, in which they transmuted metals and all kinds of substances. That art has been largely lost. It is not lost totally. There are secret schools which still operate teaching alchemy. And you have, of course, now in modern scientific terms, you have the capability with these giant cyclotrons and atom smashers, you can transmute matter on a very small scale. And when it came to the development of the atomic bomb, they had to transmute matter on a large scale. Plutonium is a synthetic element. It exists in the atomic table, but beyond the 92 elements. And it is artificially created. And they had to create it in large amounts, and they gave them a great deal of trouble. But it's modern alchemy.
Are you implying that some of the plutonium from the bombs may have been created by the secret societies through purely alchemical?
No, I wasn't implying that. I was merely stating that the conversion of uranium to plutonium is, in essence, an alchemical process because you are changing one element into another.
But very crude.
In a crude but scientific manner, but in large amounts. That is, compared to alchemy, you are converting it. We do have the technology today to do this sort of thing. And it's not in the form of the older alchemy, which is a very difficult process to learn, but it is real. But we're now doing it. What else are we doing that the public doesn't know about? This is the problem. You have a two-tiered technology.
Many tiers.
It may be many tiers. You have had a two-tier technology for 200 or 300 years at least. Radio was used earlier than Tesla, who was given the credit for developing it and inventing it in 1893. It was used as early as 1847, if not earlier. In fact, it was used, according to some reports, in the Napoleonic Wars.
To manipulate the London Stock Exchange.
Right. And by other means to do some very fancy manipulation where the public and even the elite, for the most part, were not told what was going on. Only a few key people knew. These technologies have existed from ancient times, and they've been kept well hidden. They were not available to the masses because they didn't have the technological base to build them. These may have been leftover pieces of hardware. They may have been supplied by aliens. There may have been secret laboratories that could produce them by ones and twos.
And not only this, but they were made... You have to have special technologies available only to the elite to continue their sense of control, their feeling of power. And every time a given technology is spread into the people, into the wider population, you have to present the next new toy for the elite. These higher levels of conspiracies that control the terrestrial elite, they never leave the guys without any new toys. It may be a new Nautilus submarine when everybody travels above surface and nobody even dreams of going underwater. It may be a program to land on the moon way before anybody even dreams of going there.
It's like the British team exploration of the moon in 1897, 1898.
I'm very curious of what you have heard from your channels about this.
Well, there is an interesting story that went around. A friend of mine, Preston Nichols, and I can't talk about it now because he's not only no longer employed, he's blacklisted by the government totally. When he was still working with his company, AIL, I got into a discussion with him about earlier landings on the moon and Mars, namely the Alternative 3 story in the program. And he says he got discussing this with his boss one day at the company he worked at, AIL, one of the divisions of it on Long Island. And his boss looked at him curiously. He says, "You don't really know what's been going on." He says, "You don't know anything about the moon explorations of the last century."
With an illuminated smile on his face.
And of course, Preston Nichols, who was not usually jogged very much, probably dropped his jaw to the floor at that point because that was one he was not ready for, as much as he has been ready for.